Thank you, and welcome everybody today to the Deloitte AI Institute Canada's session on generative AI in the consumer and technology, media, and telecommunications industry. My name is Peter Danforth. I'm the partner in Deloitte that services AI for consumer and the TMT industry. Before we begin, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of the lands that we are on today. Deloitte Canada has offices with representation across most of the country. We acknowledge that our offices reside on the traditional, treaty, and unceded territories as part of Turtle Island and is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Lastly, I'd like to remind you that this session will be recorded and available on the AI Institute's webpage and will be available in the language of your choosing. So as it comes to this topic, there's no denying that we live in the AI era now. Over 50% of C-suite executives that were surveyed believe that AI can improve their customer care services, and 47% of C-suite executives believe that AI will transform the way they effectively manage cost and inventory going forward. As we think about how these new technologies and the adoption of them can change the way we do business at scale and quality, there are many challenges moving from technical concept into actual scaled execution. Those include large data, legacy systems, analytical platforms, decentralized data, and lack of centralized authority and responsibility for these tools. As we scale these technologies, it also creates new problems for us in terms of how do we trust AI and what should we be doing and allowing it to do from an ethical and privacy perspective. These challenges cannot be separated from each other as you think about deploying AI at scale. So as you work through understanding the virtuous cycle of people, process, and technology, as it comes to applying these applications, it's important that we look ahead and consider how these technologies may affect the way companies move goods, services, and customer experiences forward. Some examples of AI at use today in these fields includes optimizing networks for both ground and air fleets, maximizing efficiencies in the way that goods and services are delivered to customers and to locations. Personalization is a large area of concern going for AI as well. How do you consolidate platforms, visibility to customer interactions, and use natural language processing to automate some interactions and make them more effective for customers, both in terms of experience as well as speed to service? As we think about generative AI and how it might impact our industries, there are two big examples that come to mind. The first being, you can use generative AI to create digital twins, and those digital twins can be used to simulate all sorts of customer experiences, flows through airports, how customers might interact with a certain shelf or product. The second is in technology, generative AI has the power to generate code itself from scratch. How will being able to generate multiple iterations of customer experiences or digital ecosystems affect the way we prototype and launch product at scale? As we think about these cool new capabilities that have emerged almost instantly and almost out of nowhere to the most people, how do we make sure that we don't rush into the adoption of them and create risks and privacy concerns and ethical considerations for ourselves? So how do we balance this great new opportunity for explosive growth with ensuring that these tools are adopted in a reasonable and ethical way? And with that, I'd like to transition to a quick poll question for everybody. So what ways would you use generative AI in your organization? Now, I know a lot of you are here today to get answers to that question, so you might not know right away, but we'd love to hear from you all. So please scan the QR code or enter the digits below the website mark once you get to the Slido website. See chatbots, content, email writing, market research, all great answers, customer retention, drafting letters, multimedia, Yeah, so clearly we've got some people who are starting to wrap their head around what generative AI might mean to their organization. And we have a great panel here today that we'll get to shortly once everyone's had a chance to participate in this. Who'll be able to talk more about use cases in consumer and TMT. Yeah, so very interesting, a lot of content production. A bit of coding is starting to emerge now and project management on the technical side, but I think a lot of people are thinking about this from the, content production side of the equation, which is a big area. But I think as we get more and more into this space, we'll realize how profoundly first iterations and first drafts of code can be produced and how effective they can be as we start to play around with these tools at scale. All right, well, thank you everybody for participating in the poll. It's great to see where your head's at. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists for today and thank them all for participating in this session today. So starting with Mohammed Ridwan. Mohammed is a Canadian with deep ties to EAU and has been raised there. He's built a diverse career of data engineering and product development, which began at Shopify, where he worked on data infrastructure at a petabyte scale as a software engineer. He then joined Densa, a product team in an early AI startup, where he developed machine learning infrastructure and orchestrated production and data pipeline testing platforms. Following Densa's acquisition by Cash App, or now called Square, Mo continued in the strategic development team, building new initiatives and strategic components to the Cash App ecosystem. Currently, Mo is a co-founder and chief product officer at Pluto Card, the #1 corporate card and spend management platform in MENA, which he helps large finance teams ensure they streamline their entire payables operation. Mo, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Peter. Excited to be here.
Next up, we have Mahfouzar Rahman. Mahfouzar is the senior manager at PepsiCo who oversees the ServiceNow digital transformation journey. With 15 years of industry experience at PepsiCo, he's overseen large AI projects that include completing employee experience from hiring to retiring and digital customer product journeys. With the latest applications in generative AI, he is also leads a citizen set of developers on cutting-edge AI transformations for sales, procurement, and fleet teams globally. Mahfouzar, welcome and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Peter. Good to be here.
Next up, we have Anand Nimkar, and Anand is the head of conversational and generative AI for Deloitte Canada. He focuses on technologies that deliver natural language processing to customers and employee servicing lines. He has led an engineering team on AI platform, cloud, and digital transformation programs at some of the largest financial institutions in Canada, and primarily focuses on retail banking and insurance as his industries, but he also helps a great deal in consumer retail as well as TMT, so we won't hold his FSI background against him today. Anand, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And then finally, Ian Zhao, who will be moderating our panel and our discussion today. Ian is a senior manager in our Omnia AI group, and he has over 8 years of experience designing, developing, and operating advanced analytics use cases and environments. Ian focuses on customer and marketing solutions, as well as generating value out of data. In his journey at Deloitte, he has led professional services, product management teams, and internal marketing operations for various clients, as well as at AI startups. He built a sandbox and ML capability that was recognized as one of the top 1% in the medium long-term run by MIT, Google, and Fast Company's review. Ian, welcome. Sorry, I slipped that up a bit at the end.
All good. Glad to be here and have the chance to moderate this awesome panel.
Well, with that, Ian, I'll leave you in the good hands of these very smart and fine people, and I hope you have a great discussion, and I hope everyone participating today enjoys it and gets a lot of value out of it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Great. So with that said, what I would like to do is to introduce the agenda for the day. So we want to answer a few key questions in the next 30 to 40 minutes so that everyone can walk away with a new understanding of generative AI, some inspiration on how it can be applied to your day-to-day work and to your organization. And last but not least, how can you get started? So really looking forward to this conversation because we do have a very diverse panelist on the team. Some of us walk different walks in our career, coming from consulting to technology and coming back to consulting. Some of us are in consumer, some of us are in technology. Many of us have international experience, seeing how AI has evolved throughout the next decade, right? So love to hear your thoughts on your observations so that we can provide some inspiration to everyone who's joining today. So with that said, let's move into part one. So we've been talking about generative AI, but love to spend some time just to make sure we understand what it is. So I would love to invite Adnan to provide our Deloitte perspective on what we mean by that. And then we can also give the opportunity to the panelists to talk about how they define generative AI, because it is a big term.
Yeah, and so on this panel, I think we have a mix of both technical and business-focused expertise, right? So we can cover both sides. So with your questions, as you have them, please drop them into the Q&A here or in the chat. I'll cover very quickly what generative AI is. For many of you who are interested in this webinar, this may be common knowledge. And for those who are new, just want to introduce the different modalities that exist. So generative AI is essentially the ability of artificial intelligence to create, to generate content, often seemingly original content as well, across various modalities: text, images, audio, code, voice, and video. And in the past, we would think of these as skills requiring real intelligence, like human intelligence, human level intelligence to do. So it's a powerful set of technologies because what we're seeing in society is that there's a risk and concern that they will be disrupting jobs. It will be essentially lowering the barriers to knowledge work as well. So there's both benefits and risks. Across text generation, there's different applications out there, ChatGPT being one of them that really evangelized the space. And subsequently, there have been investments and new product launches from Google and Microsoft. And, text generation is kind of where the field started. Image generation, you'll see many examples of that. Even I think the title page of this presentation was image generation. It's essentially sending in prompts to generate entire images and pictures or art. Code generation is having the ability to, while you're programming, having a generative AI follow along and suggest the next function you should write, and it essentially knows and understands your entire code base and adapts to your style. Video generation, we'll start to see a lot more examples of this, but essentially from a single prompt, being able to generate video. Movies, think about even feature-length films is kind of the real target of that. Imagine watching a movie of yourself as James Bond on the moon. You can essentially put in a prompt and every night get your own custom movie. And then we'll start to see a lot more audio generation too. So this is the ability to generate music that's actually enjoyable. And so you can imagine the potential for disruption across the different creative fields and also knowledge work. Next slide, please. So how does this, we'll be covering a few topics here, and we may say something. So we may say things like large language model or LLM. We may talk about image generation models or text to image, and we'll talk about multimodal models. Language models are effectively the text generation models that we're talking about. So essentially large neural networks that are essentially a form of deep learning where they've been trained to generate text outputs given an input text. In a text to image model, it's the same thing. Given an input text or description or an image input, it will generate an output image. And then multimodal models. These are models that are trained to work across modalities. So you can provide multiple types of inputs and receive multiple types of outputs, or go from one modality to another. So text in, code out, or video in, video out. And it's essentially a single model that can handle it all. Now, how does this really work? Now, when you think about this if you look at this iceberg diagram on the left, at the core of it is very specialized computing hardware. In many cases, this hardware is only accessible to companies that have made significant investments in technology. So typically the big tech companies out there or the cloud providers. It's very expensive to procure and run and maintain, and even requires a significant amount of energy given the size of data that is pumped through to actually train these models. The data itself is collected from all over the internet. So if you can imagine the engineering challenge required to store the vast majority of content on the internet, that's again reserved for large tech companies. The models that we interact with, they're architectures that go back, I'm going to say 5-6 years. So some of them are pretty simplistic architectures, but because of the power of the data and the computing that's available, you can essentially start to achieve very compelling outcomes. And so for a model, the input is a prompt and the outputs are what we see, essentially the generations that we see. The applications that we're interacting with, so there's many applications out there, hundreds now, that are leveraging these models at the core. These applications, what they do is they essentially compose prompts and compose outputs, or even chain prompts and outputs to actually create an interface. And so that's the layer that we typically interact with as business users or as just consumers. But it's all powered by a lot of technology under the hood. I think I'll hand it off to Ian now. I don't believe there's another slide.
Yeah, this is great. Really appreciate it. And I see some folks in the audience are trying to ask questions. So feel free to drop any question into the chat box as we progress. You don't need to wait until the end. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. But maybe with that said, thanks Anand for providing a quick overview of what we mean by generative AI. I think two things I picked up on that. Number one is original content. So I would say if we look at the last wave of AI adoption, which is back in, I would say the most recent one is back in 2014 to 2019-ish with the spark of deep learning techniques. And a lot of that are image-based use cases, but the difference is that we were able to recognize image better because of the new technique. Now in the next evolution of now we're able to generate original images and content assets, right? So I would call out that could be one of the key differences of what's different now. But I would love to pause there and see if Mo and Mafusar have any thoughts on how we define generative AI, and does that make sense to you?
Yeah, happy to kick it off. I think both Anand and Ian, you guys put it very succinctly. To me, the most important part is the original content generation part, right? But I think more than just the content generation part, to me, generative AI is a set of new tools, right? Just like how you use your guitar to play a different kind of sound than the keyboard. The generative AI, to me, is a new set of tools that you can use to create various different kind of things, whether it's music, art, everything else as well, right? Particularly excited about it in terms of personalization, which I think Peter touched on at the beginning. So I'm happy to talk about that later on in the webinar.
And Ian, just to add to Mo and all the discussion I had, there's a huge shift going on in terms of how we deliver some of the capability in the hands of our customer and the hands of our employees even. And this is where I see that there's a lot of capabilities coming in. There's a lot of, it's not about just image or content. There's a different capabilities that opening the door, and we are just tapping. We can't even keep up with some of those tapping that the challenges that are coming in. And this is where I see that there's lots of rooms, there's lots of opportunities in the months ahead or years ahead.
That's great. I think that's a great segue into our next topic, which is use cases. So now with these new capabilities and some of the challenges and opportunities that we see, right? In like, would you be able to share some of your insights and thinking on how can you apply this into your day-to-day role as a product manager, as a team leader, and also as organization, delivering value to the customer, right? So I'd love to get your thoughts on the use cases that you're thinking about, and then at the end, Deloitte will also, our team will also share what we're observing in the market.
Okay.
Sure.
So sorry, go ahead, Mo.
Oh, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
So one use case I would say that's the selling technologies that it's evolved. Right, a lot of is we had a legacy system pretty much all over, and very much at the data-driven system that we have interacts with multiple touch points. With the consumer shift, what we're seeing is that there's a new behavior from the consumer, and how are we doing it? And so one use case that I could say that giving the chatbot in the hands of the salespeople or the front line, and based on the behavior, which store, wherever store you're walking in, and we can say with the 90% accuracy that you have picked up this product. These are the other product you may like, and that is the prediction that we can do. And based on the prediction, we can backtrack and we can say, hey, we're missing these are the products on these shelves on these stores at this time, and maybe there's an event going on. It's next door, and what is that prediction we're coming in, and what is that we want to product all the shelf that we fill in with some of the product. So there's a few other use cases that I can share, Ian, but this particular one that I'd like to say that it's changing the front line, how they behave, how they order, how they even serve some of the customer. And prior to that, it was a one-way conversation. Now, I think we come across from that one-way conversation. It is a two-way or multi conversation, even with some of the consumer as we are walking into some of the store, as we're stocking up some of the shelves in the storefront.
Got it. So it sounds like it's a natural extension to the chatbot experience that we've been thinking about implementing in the last decade or so, right? Because if I reflect on the journey of chatbot, I think it started with a prescripted interaction. Say, hey, what are you here for? Pick one out of three selection that you can have, and then you go off from there. And I think in the recent years, I think we got better at that because of the natural language processing capabilities. Now we're at the verge of the next evolution, which is now there's a lot more flexibility to how that conversation can evolve. And it takes less work for a company to prescribe what the response need to be.
Right? Yeah, and it's a 30% increase to the bottom line. And that's how it is predicting, Ian. And if you can increase 30% of your bottom line with the help of technology, why not?
100%. And would love to save a conversation in terms of what are the risks and consideration that we need to put against this, so that to Peter's earlier point, as we go into the next wave of generative AI, how do we balance out the potential downside of it? Right.
Absolutely.
But we'd love to Mo, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing, what you're thinking about.
Yeah, before we jump into considerations, I'd actually love to talk a little bit about the use cases that we were talking about in the consumers and technology. One of the really interesting things that Mahfuzur had brought up was the use case when it comes to sales, right? I actually had a really, really interesting conversation with the founder a couple of days back, and they've been working on something extremely interesting. So as you know, my company is based out of Middle East. So the perspective that I come from is Middle Eastern, East Asia, and that kind of regional world. And if you're familiar even briefly with that region, you will know that live stream commerce is actually a very, very popular thing in that part of the world, right? So much so that it's kind of strange to not see it in North America, but it's extremely popular. People use Facebook Live, people use TikTok, to be able to actually sell products. One of the things that they were actually working on was that, today, e-commerce is an omni-channel experience. A customer is interacting with you from several different touch points. They're visiting your website, they're visiting your retail stores, etc. Bringing all of that information together is extremely difficult, right? So they're working on some new tools where, as you are doing the live stream and as you're the salesperson in the live stream, based on the panelists or based on the people who are joining that live stream, it gives you contextual things to sell, right? It's like, hey, person A who has joined the live stream has previously interacted with A, B, and C. Here are some of the transcripts that you can say live to be able to interact with them and convert a high-value potential customer into that. So I thought that was quite fascinating, and that I think goes back to the point that Mahfouzur had brought up. Couple of the other things that we see, I'm seeing specific to the region. One of the really curious things was that this is the first time in history where the Middle East has started to introduce corporate tax, and nobody is actually familiar with corporate tax in UAE. And the surrounding regions, and it's a very new concept to a lot of people, right? So a lot of companies, actually accounting firms and others, they're starting to experiment with taking the corporate tax manual, feeding it into generative AI tools, so that people can actually ask and query, right, to be able to actually interact with it and learn it deeper, because it's just such a huge manual that you cannot fathom, and it's such a new. So it's quite interesting how folks are using some of the AI tools like that. Yeah, so I think that's one of the really interesting parts, and we are as a company as well. We are doing a lot of these things because we serve accountants and financial controllers. These are the kind of business stakeholders that we serve, right? So a couple of the places that we are using is also around just better contextual information gathering, right? Can I ask questions in natural language to be able to generate actual content that is useful to me, right? One of the other things that we have been working on is also auto generation of reports, right? Gone are the days where you have to create pivot tables on Excel anymore, right? You can now, if you have some strict structured data, which companies like Snowflake and others are helping you provide, you can actually feed that all into models to be able to query them in a more natural way.
So essentially, in that case, you can free up capacity of your design team or analytics team to focus on more value-adding activities, such as building more data assets, for example.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, on that note, most of our product managers and product leaders within our companies, and also like the companies that we have been interacting with, very few of them actually have separate data analytics teams. A lot of them are self-serve on their own now, using a combination of various kinds of tools, including like modern AI tools that are out there. And I think, Ian, you had mentioned one of the questions was around how can you use this to be able to augment your own capabilities as product leaders or product managers, etc. Maybe I'll just touch on a brief point there as to how I personally use it on a day-to-day basis, right? So prior to being in product, my experience was in engineering. And in engineering, we have this concept called rubber duck programming, right? I'm not sure if folks have heard of it, but rubber duck programming is basically you place a rubber duck in front of you and you talk to it and you explain the code to the rubber duck. And as you're explaining that, you tend to debug what you're actually trying to solve, right? My version of that is talking to generative AI, right? I query, right? I tell it my stories, right? I tell it how I'm thinking, my market research, right? And as I am doing that, as I'm getting a back and forth conversation going, right? You hopefully generate newer insights out of that. So that has actually been probably one of my most productive hacks over the past year, right? Very grateful that this is now possible. So that I think I would recommend everyone give that a shot, right? In rubber duck programming. The other things that we've been using AI quite heavily is I run our marketing teams. And one of the key things in marketing is that you may have a hypothesis on the kind of messaging that might stick with your customer, but those hypotheses may not always be true because you're just so in your business, right? So one of the things that we've been actually able to do is with some newer tools, we've actually been able to create almost 300, 400 different variations of ad creatives, right? Which we can automate and be able to run as several ad campaigns so that we can see how the messaging is evolving and what is actually sticking, as opposed to us creating this hypotheses. So yeah, those are just some of the things. I could go on and on, but just some of the things that we've been focusing on lately.
That's awesome. And I think that's aligned well with our general observation in the market as well. So if we think about the use cases of Gen AI, if we bucket them into kind of the external customer facing experience versus internal users, right? So we touch on a lot of Gen AI technology can potentially be used to help doing customer service better, because now it's a more natural experience and interaction. So that enhances the customer experience and also potentially decrease the time to issue resolution, right? And then there's a huge bucket of use cases around just internal productivity gain. And I think we touched on that a few times already. And I think a lot of that is driven by this new capability of original content generation, right? I think Mo, you talked about how your product team and marketing team are using this content so that you can output a lot more in the same amount of time, right? And I'm also having a very similar conversation with one of our clients in the grocery space, and their marketing team is actually looking into this. One use case is exactly, Mo, to your point about how can I now create creatives so that I can move faster in my campaign design, right? In the past, they have about 1.5 FTE of content writer, and it takes them about 1 week to 2 weeks just to write all the content for a campaign and get it approved, right? Now, with Gen AI, they can output like 1,000 variation of that in a matter of maybe half an hour. Now, the interesting thing is that now we're going into kind of like the roles and responsibility change because of Gen AI. So the content creator now is actually spending less time making content, but more time QAing and selecting the right content from Gen AI solutions, right? But just want to tie back to the use cases. Yeah, so there's a lot of application, or people are trying to test how they can use it in the marketing space, and especially for this audience who's in the consumer/TMT sector. The nature of the company, a lot of the services are provided B2C, so the volume and the frequency of direct customer engagement is relatively higher than other industries. Therefore, it requires much bigger capacity, right? Now, to help with freeing up capacity, augmenting capacity, Gen AI, this is where we see a lot of conversation and testing happening in the Gen AI, using the Gen AI solutions, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Ian, one of the things that you touched on was the, how, for example, content, instead of requiring 1 FTE, now the FTE is spending their time QAing and editing. And actually, this has been, I think Peter touched on, the worry about jobs and consideration around that, right? What I'm finding though, actually, is that most folks are now turning into editors, right, and directors, right, as opposed to having to execute on that. One really good example of this is that Jeep Wrangler, the company, had recently done a ad campaign, which was fully generated by AI, right? But when you look into that, it has a style, it has a particular features that you could not tell is being developed by a Midjourney or something else, right? And that's where I think the creativity of the FTEs actually come in, where that's where some of the editing and directing skills come in, where again, these are just tools and you need to be able to use these tools effectively at your disposal.
100%. Mufusa, I'd love to hear your thoughts. In your day-to-day observation, does that align with what you're seeing? any other opportunity that you might have seen based on something we just discussed.
Yeah, just to complement what Moses touched about, there's a lot of good discussion, good use cases that are happening. In the consumer space, what I see is the customer journey, and in the past we couldn't track that customer journey from beginning to end. Now we can track that customer journey from beginning to end, and we can tie that back to the product. And this is a quick win, and then regroup and readjust and deliver. And I think that this is where a lot of shifts happening. So one particular one that one of the use cases that I can talk is some of the shelves where the products are being done, are delivered, and or how the storefront looks, right? Maybe we're doing it different from geographically, from west to east, or in the prairies or other part of the world. It doesn't have to be different. Look, if something that we delivered that worked for us, it is at your fingertip, and with the fingertip, you can actually put it in that, hey, this is how it caught the attention. So some of those marketing, some of those the front end displays are getting moved, getting shifted, and this is a huge win in terms of, and how we're doing it. It's a content that is that with the help of some of the use cases, some of the generative AI models that we're using, and I can talk that this is a huge win in the front face of the storefront and with the customers.
100%. And I think something that I want to pick up on what you just mentioned around tracking and maintaining customer journeys. So I think I want to connect the dots back to what we've been talking about, tying those insights into some kind of centralized solution within enterprise, but then allowing it for others to self-serve through maybe a Gen AI interface. So it's almost like contributing good data into a central enterprise data solution. But then for people who are not very technical in the organization, now they have better access to insight through the Gen AI solution that now we're seeing, right? So we have a few slides on the page, but I think we've touched on various aspects of it already. But essentially, this we have 3 use cases that we selected for the audience just for inspiration, and these are some of the use cases that we are seeing that's gaining traction and attention in the market. So the first one is really around allowing better personalization because of now we have more original content that's being generated by marketing teams, right? So that can provide a much better personalized experience to your customers, right? So if we move to the next one, it touched on, Mafusa, your use case around how can we provide better services to customers and also back office staff as well, right? So there's obviously this need for customer getting in touch to ask a question or get some issue resolved. But as we look at the enterprise as a whole, there's also such need internally between different teams, right? So if we think about a centralized IT function, for example, and they provide services and tools to the internal stakeholder, for example, in our line of business, a lot of their time is actually spent on issue triaging, for example, right? So this could also be not just applied to external customers. This can also be applied to internal stakeholder as well, right? And Mafusa, I think like you have some experience in this in the HR space. I'd love to like get your thoughts and inputs on this as well.
Yeah, so one use case I can talk about is employee experience. And of course, the employee experience is a big piece of my journey, that how you've been treated, how easily you can retrieve some of the information, how easily that employee portal and all those. So one use case with the help of generative AI that we can say from hire to retire, and this is somewhere that when you apply for a job, before you get into the job site, we start using that experience, and that how did you feel, what was the experience, and then when you get to the interview and the next the hiring process, when you become an employee, the big piece is onboarding, and how good we are providing that onboarding support. I think that's a big piece of your journey as an employee that you are coming in. Look, it's not about some of the checklists that, in my generation or previous generation that went through, that, hey, this is the onboarding task, this is what you do. It's not that. It's much more personalized, much more user-centric, and much more the job-centric and the role-centric. And that's how much its diff is going. And also what it's doing is it's also bringing in the content, rich content. And some of the rich contents are pulling in from different sources, some of the learning, and some of the capabilities that's bringing in. And as an employee, we want to make sure that you have the best experience while you're onboarding yourself. You have what you need to do the best, to become you an enabler for the job. And that's what is a big deal. And in my space, I can talk that we are taking advantage of that. And then how are we tracking some of the behavior, how you're spending your time, how you're being productive, what is that is taking most of you, and how are you feeling? So again, all of a sudden, the tool may say, hey, it's time for a meditation. And let's do 3 minutes of meditation, and let's take yoga. So this is the employee experience that you embedded. We are embedding so that you have that kind of experience. And this is all of the help of some of the predictions, some of the analytics that we have, some of the use cases that we have, and then where do you go from there? And this is, we're building, as we are learning you, Ian, we're building the model, and we're going forward, and we want to have the journey. And then, of course, as you're coming close to retirement, we want to make sure that you are going through the same journey. So again, this is the same model. We are what we're calling from hire to retire, and absolutely. And the mobile experience, whatever different platform you talk, it is somewhere that we're taking advantage. We say that, and some of the rich content really helping us, some of the media content that really helping us, and some of the experience built into the other capabilities there that we're taking advantage.
And that's great. Thanks, Mufisa, for sharing on what can be done from an employee experience standpoint. So I think the takeaway maybe perhaps for the audience is, as you think about how can this apply to your organization, obviously everyone is thinking about how can this apply to external customer experience to make your business better. Don't forget there's also a lot of internal opportunities that you can start with.
Actually, Ian, I would just love to touch on that as you talk about internal opportunities. So I think we touched on the fact that we are a payments company, and as such, we are in a regulated business. And one of the things that we have actually been thinking about is that, so a lot of our customer support agents, our account managers, our folks who do KYC, KYB, etc., they need to be themselves continuously audited. We need to make sure we ask them the right questions, that they know they're up to date, they're doing their training on time, right? And this needs to happen on a continuous basis because we are a regulated business. So one of the places where generative AI is actually quite useful here is that if you can plug in generative AI as part of your regulatory requirements and as part of your processes, right? And your data based on how your support agents and others are interacting with your internal tooling, you can actually automate those prompting of the questions every now and then, right? So for example, maybe you notice that a support agent has been doing fantastic work, right? And you want to make sure that they continue to be able to do so when it comes to compliance and onboarding. You'd be able to occasionally query based on the historical data and historical interactions that they've had, right? Using generative AI, if you can automate that. So that's an area that we're particularly excited about, because historically this used to be done by a compliance officer that used to be maintaining these on a regular basis, but it can actually happen on a more automated scale.
This is awesome insights. So just want to do a time check. So we have about 15 minutes left for the session. Now we're getting some very interesting insight from the panelists. What we want to do is shift gear a little bit and get into some of the key considerations. I think we've touched on a few things already, but maybe I can just recap and ask maybe Mo and Mustafa to expand on that a little bit more. So I think number one, is definitely some kind of check and balances that we need to put in place, right? And I think there is a question in the audience who's asking about who owns the content that was generated by the Gen AI solution, right? Secondly, I think the second big area is around, I would say, people, right? So now because of Gen AI, people are working differently now, right? The way they use technology is different. And then I think one of the key questions that we were actually discussing and debating with the client is that, should I allow my team to use it? The positioning was that if my junior staff don't go through the process of creating content, they won't be able to learn, and also they won't be able to see what good looks like. Hence, they cannot judge what should they select from generative AI. So that's is one big consideration around people, around upskilling, training, or should not be using Gen AI, right? So maybe we start with those two, and love to hear your thoughts on those two areas. So what kind of check and balances would you recommend to put in place? How would you think about upskilling and training people in the context of Gen AI, right? And then we can probably look at some of the key questions that's coming from the audience.
Absolutely, I can get started. So with regards to upscaling and using these such interfaces, we have been very open in our company. Actually, I think most members in our company have a ChatGPT Plus subscription, right? And that is primarily because we have seen the benefits of just testing and learning on their own, right? But there are certain use cases where we are extremely careful about, especially, as I mentioned, compliance being one of them. Primarily because folks who use tooling, many of them, unless you're in the industry, don't actually realize that all of this is based on historical data, which can be as late as 2021, right? I think the latest ChatGPT models were trained up to 2021, I believe, right? So the information you get might actually not always be the most accurate or most up to date based on the information that you have. So that was one of the key things that we've had to teach our teammates as well, right? The other things are that I think that I don't want to be too warn too much, right? But essentially, especially when it comes to PII data and just consideration in data privacy, right? We do have to realize that models are feedback loops, right? And if you don't own the weights, you don't own the data, right? And you also don't own the inputs of the things that are going in there, right? So if it is customer sensitive data, company sensitive data, right, I would be a little bit more diligent, right, to understand how and where this is flowing through. So we are careful about those things. But when it comes to general use cases, we are very open to adopting new tools because the rise in productivity is just enormous, right? So no doubts about that. Yeah, so hopefully that gives. I would love to hear from Officer as well on how he thinks about it.
Thank you, Mo. And I can talk probably from the legal, ethical, and the policy point of view. Definitely, we try to be responsible in development, and some of this capability comes with not only comes with some of the tagging, some of definitely there are always we have to follow certain regulations, some they have to certain best practices, and we're not different. And what I think the aspect is, it's you weigh in your tools and weigh in what works, what the model that probably works for us may not work for you, and vice versa. And definitely we have to weigh in the pros and cons, and that's how we kind of look at. I know Mo talked about the ChatGPT subscription. This is kind of vibe, but again, we're cautious also. It's who's getting onto it, and some of the bigger platforms, right? Snowflakes you talked about, and post GRE. So look, there are endless opportunity. It's all comes to you that how you want to use it and how you want to take advantage of the feedback loop.
Got it. So, Mustasar, one last question before we start wrapping up. Would you allow your team to use Gen AI?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
So I think the last section, I know we're about 10 minutes away from end of the session. I'd love to spend some time to talk about like how to get started, right? So what are some of the minimum prerequisites from a technology, process, and people standpoint that from your perspective that organizations need to consider now if they want to jump in with maybe not both feet, but maybe with 1 feet, right? So maybe Anna, we can start with you first.
Yeah,
and we go to Mo
jump in there
and move faster. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say it's important to be very focused about which use cases you think could benefit. Like which processes within your organization would be areas where you can augment your staff. The other thing is, I would say that in many cases, with regard to like the normal ways of working, we're going to be seeing a lot of new products being released. Right, Microsoft Copilot is coming out. Google has released a number of products for workspace. So I think we will start to transition in our normal work to kind of an AI augmented way of working. When I look at specific processes, let's say call center automation is a great example where there's a ready business case where you can automate some inbound interactions. Or another example would be on the marketing side, generating ad copy or generating advertisements. Like these are areas where you can kind of get really focused around a specific process that can be augmented, and then understand the data that you have. So part of getting ready is also doing a bit of knowledge management, really understanding what that process is, breaking it down, understanding what data is available. And then from a technology side, there's a lot of options, right? There's many providers coming out with models. There's different types of models. I think I saw a question in the Q&A about like, how do we make sure that those models are secure in a business process? They're not hallucinating or generating, or they're not error prone. That's part of the assessment work that we would have to go through, right? Like essentially with the data and the process in mind, the use case in mind, then there's a bit of a model evaluation and almost a kind of configuration around the chaining of multiple models or how we evaluate those outputs to make sure that it's actually going to achieve that business case that you're looking for. And then the rest is just, software development. it's a bit of engineering, and it doesn't, in many cases, because these models are off the shelf, you don't actually require data scientists or machine learning engineers, but you do require developers to actually compose and integrate.
Professor, any inputs or anything to add to this?
Yeah, so again, without making it complicated, so very straightforward, right? I would say that to get started, you really need to have where do you want to be, and where you are right now. And I would absolutely start there. And based on where you want to be, I think it all depends on what are the model that you are looking at. What is that? Without any ambiguity, make it simple, make it clean. There's many ways you can do it. I would start very simple somewhere, and then start loading in, and then making it easy, user friendly, and where this is, look, your target audience, who's that your target audience, that who are you catering? So to me, it's Ian and team, it's much more simpler. We started something, and then definitely the capability, what you see something right now, it didn't start 5 years back. So again, the journey has probably, it's a big reach and content base, and so for us, I think it's somewhere that I would invest heavily.
Got it. And what I took away from that is actually, if I heard it correctly, is the discipline of product design and development need to continue, right? And we don't need to do anything different now, just because a lot of the due diligence in terms of engineering processing we continue to do that better.
Totally.
Before we move on to the last section, love to hear from Mo. Anything to add to this?
No, I think Ian, you touched on exactly right. The things that I tell my product teams is that we just stay the course. The only difference in our thinking is that whenever we're trying to solve a user problem, we try to ask ourselves, can this benefit from a probabilistic solution, right? As opposed to just a deterministic software, right? And I think that's the only shift in thinking we've had, right? And that has actually unlocked several different interesting things, right? But typically we just start extremely small and simple, which is just by looking at the problem that we're solving and asking ourselves as we are in the solutioning phase, can this benefit from a probabilistic solution?
Got it. This is great. And really appreciate your insights and input into this. So I know we're about 3 minutes away from wrapping up the session. I know there's a lot of questions that we could not get through in the chat. So we'll try our best to make sure we follow up and find a way to respond back. But maybe perhaps before we leave the session, love to hand it off to Adnan just to quickly share about if you are thinking about discovering opportunity to apply Gen AI, how can we help?
Yeah, so we are offering a generative AI lab construct, right? So your PR organization is thinking about use cases, or you need assistance in looking at your business and determining where the highest impact opportunities would be. This is a great place to start. So we have a multi-module series. The first module is focused on use case identification and prioritization. And then the second module is really about feasibility. So taking those use cases and in the room with many vendors, from various big tech companies, many of our partners, we can actually start to break them down and look at opportunities for an actual larger scale out. So if you're interested, please reach out to, I believe, the AI Institute, to the contact information you have for this session, and we'll get you connected to that.
And this is great. So before I pass it back to Aisha to help us to wrap up, Mohammed and Mufusar, really appreciate your time. And this is invaluable to hear your thoughts and observation in the market. And I hope the audience can take something away from this as well.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And thank you to all of the panelists as well as to the moderator for today's session. As you'll see on screen, we do have an exit poll just to get your sense of takeaways from this session and also what you saw and reflected in terms of conversations moving forward. This is not the last of our generative AI series. Next week, we'll wrap up one more session on generative AI as applied to energy, resources, and industrials. We're happy to have both Boost Power and Ontario Power Generation who will be participating in that conversation. So please stay tuned for that, as well as our upcoming webcast on our regular programming schedule, which will be data monetization, followed very shortly after, a 2-day gap, and then followed by Web3 and computer vision. As always, we thank you for your attendance, as well as your loyalty for the webcast series, and also look forward to your feedback moving forward. So with that, thank you all again for staying with us throughout this conversation, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions moving forward. And wishing everybody a great rest of your day because we are at time, but please take a few minutes to complete our exit poll.